All right, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Noise Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes, the show where we dig into the stories of the people shaping the future of app based computing with a special focus on mobile. I'm your host, Matt Klein, co founder and CTO of BitDrift, as well as creator of Envoy. Each episode will talk with engineers, founders, and technical leaders who've transformed the way their companies build and understand what's happening inside their systems. We'll dig into the challenges, the breakthroughs, the lessons learned, and wrap it all up with their hottest takes. So let's dive in. Today, I'm thrilled to have Hemant Garg, who is a vice president of engineering, leading the front-end platform and core user journeys across mobile and web at DraftKings. He oversees teams of engineers building scalable, high-performing applications and also leads full-stack teams driving new product launches. A hands-on leader, Hemant combines deep technical expertise with strategic vision, ensuring seamless customer experiences while accelerating innovation. His current focus includes exploring AI agent tools to enhance developer productivity and unlock new efficiencies across engineering. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so glad I'm here.
Yeah, you have a very impressive background, obviously very appropriate to this podcast. You've been in the industry for a long time, working across a lot of different companies. So I think my first question is, can you, with whatever you're willing to share, can you give us a breakdown, of how you got into front end and mobile development and just, what excites you about this space? I think that's a great place to start.
So I've been in the mobile industry all my professional life, which is almost 21 years. And I grew up back in India where there was, I started my career way before Apple and Google were a thing. It used to be Nokia phones without much UI, just mostly buttons.
Flip phones.
So flip phones,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Flip
right.
phones or candy bar phones. So I
Yeah.
remember when I passed out of my college, I went for my first interview and they showed us a Sony Ericsson phone which had like a full UI, a touch screen, and that got me so excited that this is the future. I've never seen in my life a small device with a UI on it. So at that point, I knew I wanted to work on this UI things, which is very fascinating. How can you pack so much things on a small device?
Yeah, for
Right.
sure. I also actually started my career on mobile, which I think surprises most people because these days I'm mostly known as a systems engineer. But I actually started my career working on Windows Phone, actually, which predated iPhone. So it is a very interesting space. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess tell us a little more, just in terms of, I don't know, would love to know what was your first project, what was your first app that you created, and then tell us how you wound up in the U.S. and working for some of the largest companies.
Yes. So I started chasing my mobile dream the moment I saw that Sony Ericsson phone. The first company I worked for was a very small startup-y kind of a company which was doing a mobile browser for Motorola phones. Motorola was the biggest device at that point. So we were developing this mobile browser for Motorola, and then soon I realized I want to go and play the big roles at big companies. So I switched to Motorola, started working at Motorola in different departments, different teams. I worked on different tech stack. I worked on the OS, grew from OS to the applications, and then one day Motorola decided to consolidate all their best engineers. I mean, I'm glad they considered me the best, and moved us to US and said we're going to work on something new, something killer, which will change the game. And that turned out to be Android.
Oh
So I,
wow, okay, cool.
yeah,
So
so I
is this before Android launched, or was it at kind of at the same time?
So I was part of the team which actually developed the first Droid phone for Motorola. I was picked
Wow.
into that team, 200 people team. I came to Silicon Valley, became a part of a team which was tasked to make Android device, the Droid phone. And I started writing the OS level. Then I did the camera application, the media gallery application, and bunch of applications. Ultimately, my hands were on them, not necessarily the only guy. And it was so exciting to launch the Droid phone and see your fruits in action, which changed the whole game. Like Android became a very solid answer to iPhone, and I was glad to be part of the team.
But at that point, I would imagine that you were working very closely with Google because they were effectively developing the operating system at the same time, right? So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
so I mean, I would love to hear some war stories about. I'm sure there were some awful bugs that you had to solve, So I don't know. It's
Yeah.
like, do you remember what's the worst bug that you had to figure out?
Oh man, going back in memory lane, there were many things. It was shaping up a lot, so it was very different from what Motorola used to be. So just to give you a glimpse, the most popular device, Razer, had a team of around 15,000 engineers working on the whole device.
15,000.
Motorola had its own hardware, its own OS, its own chips, its
Right.
own every
Yeah.
single component which goes into the mobile thing, right? And comparatively to that, the whole Android team was 200 to 300 people,
Right.
where the goal was, look, everything is coming from Google. All you do is package it up, test it, and release it. The story, first of all, was not very true. Like, hey, this is not a tested one. And Motorola was very high on quality. We were a digital Six Sigma company. That means there was we can only afford to have like one or two bugs in a million opportunities. So there was a very different ball game. Motorola wanted to ship everything which is the best in class. And Android, when we got the Android OS, it was nowhere close to that. There were tons of bugs. The camera cannot take more than 5 pictures in a row and crashes. So the challenges were how to take Android OS and bring it to the Motorola quality standard, and then release it to T-Mobile was the first. Verizon was the first customer.
Yeah, I actually, it's going back so far now, but I remember, I don't know if it was with HTC, it might have been Motorola. I'm not sure. It was early in my
HTC,
career when I was working on Windows Phone. And just to follow up on what you said, I remember that we would do builds and we would send them to Asia, and overnight they would, I'm not joking, they would have hundreds of testers who would, test stuff. And it's exactly what you said. They would, send back a report that said something like 1 in 10,000 of this thing failed, like it's not acceptable.
yes.
So we had to debug these issues that at the time were I actually think still some of the most complicated bugs that I had to figure out in my career were very early on some of these early phones, just because of what you said, which is that these companies at that time, I don't know if it's still that way, but at that time they were very rigorous about what they would want
Yes.
out of their
Yeah.
devices, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. So going back to your question, right? I remember I was tasked to do this camera, and the goal was the phone can take, I think, 500 pictures in a row without crashing. And it was almost impossible to do that. Like it would crash at five, six, seven. So much memory optimization went into this thing of like, how do we make sure that the speed versus the stability decision has to be made. So it was very hard. That was the most hard bug at that point I had to fix.
And at the time, I'm just curious because obviously people know that Android is mostly written in Java. Obviously, the operating system is, based at that time is based on a fork of Linux, and obviously there's a lot of native code. So I'm curious, like, was it crashing in Java land or was it crashing in the native drivers? I mean, it's like what was causing all of the instability at that time?
It was all over the place
Yeah,
because OS was not stable. The chips and the layer above the chips were also not stable. So it would just crash randomly all over the
right.
place.
Yeah,
There used to be like a tombstone crashes, the whole device restarts. And at that point there was not enough tools to go debug and see what happened. So you had to guess a lot that, oh, this might be happening. And you had to collaborate a lot with the full stack engineers all the way to the chip. I remember the
right.
chip was a third party chip, and we had to call those engineers also, like why this chip crashed.
Yeah,
So
it's yeah. Those types of debugging stories are so fascinating to me. Um,
yeah.
so anyway, so from there, where did you go?
So after Motorola, I spent almost 5 years there, and I was in Silicon Valley. And then the famous quote, if you're in Valley, do the Valley stuff. I went out of Motorola and found my first startup, Evernote. where Evernote was in a very nascent stage. They had a very successful product on Mac, on Windows, and on iPhone, but it was zero on Android. So I joined them to start the whole Android team. I was the only guy, the one-person team, and I spent 5 years, close to 5 years at Evernote and developed the whole Android team from scratch and then multiple apps. And fortunately, all those apps turned out to be number one on app stores. We won Google Design Award. We presented Google I/O a bunch of times. I presented Google I/O a bunch of times. So that was the most fruitful experience of my career to develop an app from scratch, which was very different. Like no OS involved. You can't change things in OS or anything which is below OS. You have to purely work by the rules
Yeah,
of
with
the
with the
OS.
APIs that are there. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess I mean that's obviously an amazing accomplishment. What what do you think you did or learned back then that you think had the most impact of getting it to be number one on the App Store with the highest review scores? I guess what I'm asking is, I would imagine that that's where you started to learn like what makes a really high quality app. So I would love
Yes.
to learn more about what do you think are the most important things that go into a very high quality app?
A lot of things, right? A lot of things. First of all, is the app something which the customer will use, right? Since I was the only person, I was wearing the hat of a product manager, a designer, an engineer, an architect, a customer support, everything. So the first thing is this the product which you want to really ship? Is this what people will use? Does it have the best in class UX, UI? Is it intuitive enough? And once that is done, then now you have to code the app in such a way that it never crashes. Especially Evernote was a note-taking application. It cannot crash while you're in the middle of taking a note. We cannot lose your note while after you saved a note. So stability and performance were paramount. And one of the biggest things which I feel made Evernote class apart was how quickly we reacted to customer complaints, how quickly we see there is an issue happening, and how fast we can fix in days, not in months, not in quarters.
Yeah.
So that was the critical thing. And there's an interesting story. While I was working on Evernote, another app came out which became very popular, Instagram. And I remember the day when Instagram was launched, and one day they had to make like 7 or 8 releases. Like something crashed, and they fixed it very quickly, put it in the App Store. So that actually taught me a lesson that in Evernote, I was doing it in 2 or 3 days, but you know what? I have to do it faster than that. So the key was how fast you listen to your customers and fix them.
I think one thing I'd like to pick your brain on is, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine in the app space. So I want to get your take on it. Is that in a lot of high quality apps, you know, the actual crash free session rate is quite high, right? I mean, it's like crashes are not in the grand scheme, they're obviously very important when they happen, but in the grand scheme of things, they don't affect that many users. Obviously, there can be all kinds of other things that do affect users. The app is slow to load, or the, you know, the network connectivity doesn't work, or it hangs, or something along those lines. So I just wanted to get, you know, your opinion on how do you think at that time, you know, how do you start thinking about all of the different kinds of issues that might lead to people complaining or dropping off or all of those things, and how do you prioritize, I would say, like the more obvious problems, crash is obviously super obvious, versus the less obvious problems, it's slow or it doesn't load well or your conversion rate on the screen sequence is bad or something along those lines.
Yes, there are multiple things actually. Crash is one of the most critical thing. Yes, that people cannot use the app if it crashes, but other aspects are equally important. For example, this is how I put it: frustration free.
Yep.
Is the customer experience frustration free? Are they having errors? Do they have a path to recover out of the errors? And then the performance of the app, the perception of the performance, and they're two different things. Is it hanging a lot? So all those different criterias went into designing one of the best apps. Right. Even today, I feel like people only focus on crash free, but it has to be frustration free metric. Now, what is the frustration? It could be just the user experience. And how do you measure that is what are the top business critical OKRs, KPIs you want to set for yourself? And are the customers able to meet them? For example, at that point, are customers able to create notes quickly? Can they create a note within 5 minutes? Can they see all their notes very quickly? When they click on a note, can they see the note? Are we losing their notes? Like when they create a note and if there was no network, what will happen to the notes?
Yeah.
So all those different business criterias along with this non-functional requirements of speed and frustration comes into play.
And I was going to say, I mean, at the time, because we're going back now a bunch in time, that I would imagine that you had to build a lot of infrastructure to actually measure these things, right? So, I mean, I'm
Yes.
actually curious about that as well, is that as we were saying before, like crashes are important. There are a small percentage of issues. It's relatively easy to measure crashes in the sense that you get the crash dump and those kinds of things. But for all these other issues, I would imagine you had to build like a set of analytics or tooling or whatever else to actually understand that. So could you, I guess,
Yes.
talk a little more about how you think about, how to measure and understand these non-crashing issues?
Okay. We have to build a lot of tools to figure out how do we even measure things and how do we even, and once it is captured on the phone, where will it actually go? Where we can go and see, analyze it. So there were not many good real-time tools available at that point.
Yeah.
So we had to build our own things, which goes to big this Apache, Kafka, no Kafka, sorry, big data systems. It will churn the data overnight, and then you to go and see the result after a few hours.
Yep.
And it was always a challenge that it takes like 7, 8 hours to go and see the result of what you just released.
Yep.
So those tools were pretty hard, and we were trying to figure out how do we make it more real time so we can watch this live in action and react to it. There was no Firebase at that time, right? So we actually figured out tools where we can keep recording these actions locally on the device, and then whenever a problem, and we also made a problem detector. Like whenever we think a problem happened, then we figure out all the different logs which happened in past, and then upload it via email. Email was the fastest way to get
What
the
what
data
you're
back
talking
to
about
us.
sounds a lot like Bitdrift, but yes, so like a very,
Yes.
very early version of Bitdrift. That's awesome.
Yes, and then we keep recording everything and we say, tell the user, ask the user, you tell me when you think there is a problem, press this button, and then I will get all the logs
Yep.
via email. And we used to get a lot of emails. And there was no email automation at that point. So we like literally read all the emails, and then we kept refining those emails and the data of the emails. Like, let's do some more analysis right on the device when the error has happened.
Yep.
So that when I get the email, I have this pre-analyzed sense of
Fantastic.
the problem.
Yeah. Cool. No, it's fun for me because obviously we believe that that's a really important area to help people debug these systems. It's fun to hear about people that have built similar things in the past. So I guess take us on from Evernote. Where did you go from there?
So after Evernote, I actually got a good degree and sense of I can do boldness, that I can do much more things, and at a very early stages. So I joined a startup where I was an early founding engineer. The startup name was Relc. It was into mobile search space, hoping to compete against Google and Yahoo and Microsoft. So it was a very small company, 4 or 5 people company, based in San Francisco. Though the company didn't last longer, it got wrapped up in 1.5 years. But the thing which we built as part of the company was outstanding. The company focused on mobile part of the search and more personalized search results. At that point, Google search was mostly about web based. Whenever you type Google search, it used to go to web and people can see the web results, the standard web results. And we wanted to make that search more focused on the mobile. Can the search result be based in terms of the apps on your device? Can it be influenced by the data which you have on the device? And then can the results be handled on the device? Say, for example, if you search for how do I go to a location, then the result will be Uber, and you can click on it, and Uber will actually book a ride for you to go there.
Yep.
The company didn't do very well. We had to wrap up in 1.5 years. We ran out of money because search is a very costly problem to solve.
It also sounds like it's a little ahead of its time. I mean, you think about what people are doing now with all of the AI models and local AI models and how all of that works. I mean, it seems like we're actually heading back in that direction at this point.
Yes, it was a very bold move. I think it was ahead of the time.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So then what was next after that?
So after LC, due to I joined this another company. I wanted to try something new, and Bitcoin blockchain was pretty, happening, hip and stuff. So I joined this company called Gift, GYFT. It was into porting gift cards balancing system onto the blockchain. So they wanted to do a lot of things on blockchain. I joined this company, and the goal was how can we uh, leverage blockchain to do gift card management and then sell it to enterprises like big enterprises like Walmart and Best Buys of the world. The company, I was there for a couple of years. The moment I joined the company, within few months, it got acquired by a big financial company called First Data, and they really loved the front end part of the company. First Data was traditionally a back end side of the company. They were the biggest. They had the biggest payment processing company in US, which you have never heard of before. So they were always behind the scenes, and they bought a bunch of startups to work on the front end side of the world, like make gift card processing. They also own this company called Clover, which was a POS system,
Yep, sure.
right? So I joined First Data as part of the acquisition, and I grew up over there very fast, owning all of the mobile for First Data, and I became a vice president of technology over there.
And I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but was that your first experience of doing apps in a more controlled environment with like financial controls and all of those things? And I would love to learn a little more about, I don't know, what it's like to go from, I don't know, fast-paced startup world. I know how startups work, to an environment in which you have financial regulations and all of those things. I don't know, like tell us more about what that transition was like of like learning to deal in this new world of financial regulations.
You are absolutely right. It was a very different world than startups world, and the audience was different, and the goal was different. So it was a very different world. The goal was never to ship something out. The goal was ship the best in class, most regulated, and make sure it satisfies all. It was back to Motorola actually in a way, like make sure you're shipping the best in class, right? And it was not just about financial regulation. It was also about small company versus big company. The big company has a lot of SDLC processes, back to the app world. And to be honest, I never went to those processes before joining First Data because Motorola was more not an app developer, right? So
Yep.
we used to ship once in 6 months. Here we are shipping once in a month, and you have to follow all these processes within a month. So the challenge actually became very big, that how can you do a similar thing as Digital Six Sigma in a month? How can you do all those processes in a month and ship something and monitor that very closely for a few weeks before you decide, oh, this is good, and we move on to the next one. Right.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, do you find in that environment, I guess because the cost of mistakes are so high in that type of situation, could you talk a little more about where did you find the investment was most worth it in terms of keeping high quality? For example, pre-release testing or automated UI testing, or maybe, having the right analytics system so that when I went out in the wild, you could understand if there were issues. I'm just trying to understand what it meant to be able to, quote, go fast in that type of environment. Like what tools helped you
Yes.
do that?
Yeah, a lot of them, right? You have to rethink the whole STLC process. Me coming from startup, I had to rethink the whole STLC process. And one of the goals which I had was, this is a big financial company. It's releasing once in 2 months. How can we go back to once in a month release? So rethink the whole STLC. And a lot of things was around stability and consistency and predictability of what you're going to release. So for all those things, you need tools before you release and you need tools after you release. As you said, before you release, you have to make sure you have covered all your business critical, all your security concerns, all your performance issues, your crashes, your top business cases. All of them have to be tested and thoroughly tested. And you need to have a log of whatever you have tested, because this is what you have to maintain, logs of everything which you have done which you have to submit to regulatory bodies to test or review. And we had to invest a lot of those in tools. And suddenly in that company, the focus changed. Now we cannot really build all these tools. So we had to go and look outside. What are the best in-class tools available? And again, the cost became a factor in these companies that we can't spend a lot of money. So to find the tools which is best in class and yet cheaper to go and own and use them, and the tools which are also compliant, regulatory compliant, and
Yep.
security compliant. So
Yep.
all these things becomes a challenge for me to go and find out, for example, what is the best observability tool available in the market, which is SOC compliant,
Yep. Yeah.
right? And similarly, then after you release, what are the tools which follows PCI compliance,
Yep. Of course.
PII compliance, and follows the HIPAA law, and all those things becomes a challenge to go and find such tools. And how do you maintain all the different layers of obscurity from all the people who can access this data?
Yeah. Yeah. It is very interesting to me that in certain ways the industry has come a long way in terms of those kinds of compliance. I think a lot more companies are getting, SOC 2 a bit earlier than they might have in the past. But at the same time, I think, there's such a proliferation of apps and systems and all of these things that I, I think the chance of making mistakes goes higher, right? And that's actually, I
Yes.
mean, we're like maybe jumping ahead, but one thing that I'm curious about, and since we're already on the topic, is now that we've moved into a world in which people are creating a lot more code with artificial intelligence, like vibe coding, and one thing that I've been wondering myself, especially in these more regulated industries, is I just feel like the chance of mistakes around data leakage or security issues or things. I mean, there's already been lots of random stories that I've seen. So I don't know. I'm just curious to get your take, right? Like, do you think that in these regulated environments that the tools are going to take longer to like come in, that people will use the tools in a more regulated way as well? I'm talking about the AI tools, right? Just to like how do you keep the quality bar? And it's not to say the humans can't make the same mistakes, right? It's more just trying to understand in this new world, are there additional controls that are maybe needed, right? Like when we're dealing in these highly regulated areas.
Yes, I think you are now talking about what I'm doing now, right? So one of the top things in my mind is, sure, we have seen Cursor AI and Windsurf, they can write code very fast, right? And the developers are getting less and less involved into line by line code reviews, right? So they are like relying on more and more on AI to develop giant lines, files of codes, right? So the focus is more on what tools should we build to, to add the checks in place, checks at every part of the SDLC, checks about the code which is developed by AI is the best. It is meeting all the requirements. Is it meeting all my quality gates, my crash rate gates, my non-functional requirement gates? And then we also have to invest in tools which is more about mitigation of the mistakes. Because it's one thing to do a mistake and catch it. There's another thing, how do I mitigate it very quickly? Because we know that AI will do mistakes. It hallucinates a lot. We know that with the pace we are moving on, there will be more and more mistakes. To make those mistakes less costly, how can we also invest in automated observation and automatic fixing of these problems?
Could you say more about that? So like in terms of, do you mean that when the code gets released, observing like differences between versions, or like how are you thinking about observing problems? And by automated fixes, are you referring to like a feedback cycle where, I don't know, like crash or issue reports would be fed back into the changes that went into it, and then maybe looking for potential
Yeah.
issues? I'm just trying to understand a little more detail what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there are a couple of ideas which we are working on. The very bare, simple idea is this, right? Whenever you release something, you also have a backup plan. And with AI, the goal is we will be shipping more frequently now than bi-weekly cycles. So if you're shipping fast, you also have a backup plan ready. And when you ship something, now your AI is observing your tool wherever your observability data is going.
Yep.
And if it sees your business critical use cases, let's say you have 50 business critical use cases. Now you're very closely monitoring those 50 use cases. And if you see a blip on those, your AI can automatically switch back your build to the previous version and say, look, there is something wrong. Let's go
Right.
back, basically.
Yep. Yep.
So you're relying, so that's the very simple use cases. Now, two is, let's imagine now it's a big decision to go back for one use case, which is not doing well, but other 49 are doing well. Then you can make your AI more intelligent to take a decision on which one you should feature flag off to go back to the previous one, but let the other ones continue to grow, basically, continue to adopt. So the third one is basically like among these, let's say a crash is happening, right? Then now today we bring human in the loop to figure out what percentage of users are crashing. What is the business opportunity lost because of those users? Are those users just opening the app, or did it crash in a critical business test case? All those scenarios can be now analyzed by AI very fast and can take a decision. Okay, it's a very critical crash. Let's go and fix the crash, make a PR for it, put it for review, and push a new build quickly. That's another mitigation way.
Yeah, it is very fascinating to me, how these tools are evolving and how they're being rolled out, and I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I think we'll talk about it more. We skipped some critical portion of your career history, so I just want to talk briefly from First Data. Then you went where?
From First Data, I went to JP Morgan Chase, the Chase Bank.
So you upped your company size even larger. Yeah.
I upped my company size, but reduced my role. So I went from management back to individual contributor. So I went there as an IC, as a principal engineer, and the goal was, Chase is one of the largest banks, and their CEO, Jamie Dimon, famously said to all the bankers, Silicon Valley is coming. That means get ready. All the old traditional banking companies, financial companies, are going to face a very big challenge from the new world companies like Robinhood, Wealthfront, Affirm, and all these companies. So he wanted to invest heavily into tech and the modern tech principles to make sure the bank is also scaling and adopting these modern technologies and get ready themselves. So I was hired as part of this initiative.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started interacting with JP Morgan through my work on Envoy, I didn't understand how many software engineers JP Morgan employs. I mean, it is like a very large number. And I think I'm just curious, being in a principal engineering role, in like the size of that organization, I don't know how many mobile engineers they have, hundreds or thousands, I'm sure. And
no, it was a very small team, but go ahead.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So I guess then tell me more then, because I know that, I don't think it's public, but I know that JP Morgan employs tens of thousands of engineers, like across all of their websites and all of these other things. So then I guess, what was it like, I guess, to be trying to modernize like some of the technology within such a large organization?
Yeah. So when I joined Chase, the mobile team was not very big. It was, I think, close to 50 people. And yet it was very distributed, working on different aspects of the mobile app. And before I go there, actually, right, we all should take a step back and understand Chase is like Alphabet. It's like JP Morgan Chase is the
lots
umbrella
of different
company.
pieces. Yep.
And within that, there is bank, credit card company, home loan, car loan, commercial, financial. There are a lot of companies internally. But the mobile app was one. The flagship app was one. And the team was very small, 50. The goal was there, like, how do we first scale this team of 50 to 200? Because we all know, the company knew that mobile is where they have to invest heavily and go compete with the Robinhoods of the world. And what will it take in terms of people, processes, and is our tech ready for that expansion, right? Are we adopting modern code principles, tools, architecture right now? So I had like 3 goals given to me: improve the tech so that we can go compete with these companies, get us ready, the developer productivity style, so that we can scale the team from 50 to 200.
But when you talk about improve the tech, like that's that's a very general goal. And I think what I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand is in such a large organization, what were you like, you personally, what were you trying to achieve? Meaning, I can imagine you wanted them to be able to release the app faster with higher quality, or maybe you wanted to crash less, or maybe you want there to be less rage quitting or rage tapping. I'm just like trying to understand is
Yeah.
what did it mean to JP Morgan, right? To like be tech forward? Like what did you feel you all had to do to compete with companies like Robinhood?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I mean, Robinhood is just an example, not necessarily
Yeah,
we're
of
competing
course.
directly with
Yep, sure.
Robinhood.
Yep.
It was, so the goal given to me was number one goal was stability. We want to ship monthly. The company was shipping quarterly before I joined. We want to ship monthly with more predictability and more features into it. So the goal was instead of 10 big features, we want to ship 15 big features
Yep.
monthly with higher predictability. So there was a very broad business goal actually. And then to achieve that goal, the number one thing is, do we have the right tools to measure? Like,
Yep.
are we success or not? So we have to go revamp the tools. I have to go and define what does it mean to be successful. I mean, as you said previously, crash rates are not the only success criteria, but
Sure.
the company was watching only the crash rates. So we said, look, let's expand. What do we really want to measure to be called ourselves a successful release?
Yep.
And get the right tools in place. And then go back and look at the code, like how developers are coding every day. What is their SDLC process? How do they code, they test, and they verify, and how the codes get merged into the main branch to get released to the production. So every aspect of this was under a lens to go and see, are we doing the best possible way so we are all gelling together and releasing something. And I can go into more details of steps I
It's
have to go get there.
I think it's interesting. I think people will be interested. You come into a large organization like that, you're trying to bring more modern development principles. I'm just curious, what do you, was there one big bang, or like was it many small things? I'm just curious, like what did you feel were the biggest benefits that you were able to change, that ultimately, because I think what we're saying is we'd like to increase velocity and increase quality. I mean, that's obviously what we
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
But it's like, what do you feel as part of that effort was the biggest bang for the buck in terms of meeting that goal? Or was there not one big thing and it was many
There
small things?
is, yes, there was no one big thing. It was many small things, and it was like changing the wheels of the car while we're running in the race.
Yeah.
Like literally on the road, we're changing the wheel every release cycle and say, okay, now this has improved, now that has improved. So I can go into from my memory, like what are the major things we achieved. The number one goal was actually build speed, how much time it takes to build, and what how our build teams are structured, build scripts are structured. Because if developers cannot put the code quickly, they will
Yep.
not be able to compile the code. A lot of things about developer productivity. The builds have to be stable all the time. Nobody can break the build and go home. What are the tools available to make sure that happens? It's a whole CI/CD pipeline. How do we set standards for here is unit test coverage? How do we set standards for what do we observe when we put a code? And how
Yep.
do we manage our observability? That means when we release a new feature, I want them to observe every single major if else pipeline and also major error codes exception handling. But once a product is shipped and stable for a month or so, reduce the observability. We don't really want to see every if else after that. Then how do we really structure our code? The code was, I think, 6 or 7 years into the making, and it's a giant blob of code basically, and nobody really understood. Like, if I want to make one payment-related code change, what are the different effects it has? Like, what should the testing really focus on?
Yep.
At Chase, there were at least 2,000 test cases to be tested before we make a release, and the chunk of the quarter was about testing because it was a regulated environment and a banking application which cannot afford to crash or which cannot afford to, like, let the user cannot log in. So a lot of focus was on testing, and then how do we reduce the time from a month of testing by really figuring out, okay, let's figure out this change affects these test cases, so let's focus only on these test cases. And how do we automate them a lot? So, and how do we apply modern testing principles of testing pyramid? How do we do unit testing is the major one, then integration testing, and how do we do a lot of mocking so we can do testing faster?
Yeah. I think that's what I assumed, is that in that kind of organization there probably isn't one big thing, but it is certainly an effort to bring all of those modern practices in,
Yeah.
and then to continue on and take us to where you are now. You're at DraftKings now, obviously. Tell us a little bit about what led you there, and the kinds of things that you're working on now.
Yes. So at DraftKings, we have 5 apps, and all these 5 apps are very highly regulated, and the complexity has become multiplied by 18 because Chase app was regulated by one body. DraftKings apps are regulated by different states. Every
That's
different
right.
state
Yeah, it's per
has their
state.
own
Yeah.
regulation. So the problem just multiplied by 18 times. So one single login has got 18 different variations, one for each state.
Do you actually ship? I don't know. I apologize. Do you ship different apps for each state, or is it one app and then basically it changes its behavior based on the location that the user is in, or something along those lines?
It's one app. So App Stores allows us only to ship one app for the whole US. So we ship one app, and then it changes the behavior of the app depending on where the user is, the location of the user. And location is the name of the game here because states wants to make sure that nobody's spoofing their location.
I was gonna say, and I'm sure this is proprietary and you can't share that much, and that's fine. But it is a really interesting subject to me. Is that I was gonna ask that, is that even with GPS or what people can do on the phone, or however you figure out location, VPNs, and all of those things, it's not that difficult to change your location. So, I don't know, it's like, is that a significant portion of effort, or are you able to say, if the OS tells me X, Y, or Z, like that is good enough for me, I guess?
Oh, no, no. So not just the OS, right? So again, when state defines the regulation of geolocation, they also define what things we have to check to make sure the
Oh,
geolocation is correct. And they
interesting.
also have vendors which are licensed by states to be the authority to tell that to us, like, what's the location? So we have to use one of those authorized licensed vendors for geolocation
I see. So, and
outside
that
outside what we do.
and and that changes by state. So you have to actually switch the code dynamically to figure out which provider needs to be used, or all of those things based on it.
Yeah, it's not that big of a problem because there are vendors which are licensed in majority of the
I
states.
see. Okay. Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the rule to apply for each state differs, right? So some states will say this much stringent check is okay. Some state will say we can be a little bit relaxed.
Yeah. And then I guess, coming from your experience, obviously at Chase, and helping to modernize that stack, I mean, DraftKings has been around for a while, but I would imagine it is a more modern organization. So when you joined, I guess, were there particular goals that you were hired to achieve, or like what have been the biggest things that you've been working on since you joined there?
So I was DraftKings' first executive in the mobile space. There was no other executive before me, and now we are growing and we are hiring more and more people. So there were multiple goals assigned to me. Now, one biggest goal was make the platform. We had a platform before I joined, but it was a very nascent stage concept of platform. So I have to make this whole mature platform which can be used by multiple apps, and the platform has to be designed in such a way that it's scalable, is plug and play, and yet it is very say stringent in what the apps can do, what apps cannot do. So that was the goal given to me.
Yeah.
Scale this platform, have a very clear sense of all these journeys, and then roll this out to all the verticals, all the apps basically. Um,
And I guess I would ask the same question about your experience at Chase. I guess, in the last few years that you've been there, what do you see now as like the biggest challenges that people are facing in mobile and front end development? I mean, it's like I guess what has been from an executive perspective, what has been your biggest focus on? As we said, ultimately you want to increase velocity and increase quality. So I guess what do you see as the biggest challenges right now? What is your main focus?
Um, Leaving the organizational challenges outside,
Yeah, of
like
course. Right.
to
Yeah.
focus only on the mobile principal stuff, right? I think there is still a lot of options available. Like there's no real consistency in how to develop a best mobile application. So there is no real guidance from Apple and Google. This is how you write an application. This will be the best in class. It is left to people to figure out. Every company went through this challenges. Like I've seen this challenge in First Data, then at Chase, and now at DraftKings. What is platform? How to use the platform? How to do an interface-driven programming? So I think that remains the biggest challenge. And then the second biggest challenge is how do you really structure your code for your teams to collaborate and go faster? How one team cannot depend on the other team? How can they reuse the or not reuse the same code base to go fast? I think those two areas are still the biggest challenges of good and fast mobile development.
Do you do you think that that's because I would say like the platform APIs and frameworks that Google and Apple provide are not rich enough such that then people have all kinds of other things on top, whether that be different open source libraries or React Native or whatever else, that's like one side. Or I don't know, do you think that some of the more popular open source frameworks and libraries that people are using that they're not robust enough such that every company picks and chooses? I'm just trying to
Yeah.
understand, why do you think that after so many years that there still isn't more consistency? Because I agree. I mean, we also see the same thing where it is all over the place what people are using in terms of how they do networking, whether they
Yeah.
use React Native or not, or Flutter or something else. There's so much out there, and it is interesting because after 20 years of mobile development, you would think that there would be more consistency, but there isn't.
Yeah. So leaving React Native and Flutter aside, because those are cross vertical, cross
Sure.
platform
Yeah.
technologies, right? Google and Apple, sure, Google still invests in this, but Google and Apple doesn't have a vested interest in making sure the cross platform
Of
works
course.
properly.
Yep.
So I think both Google and Apple's designs, like the app APIs they provide, they work flawlessly for small applications. Their main focus in how do we get more and more young native developers, entrepreneurs to start applications, which is like 4 or 5 screens. They really don't do a great job in figuring out what happens when they grow beyond five, what happens when they become 20, 50, 100. That's where the problem starts happening. They don't have a good guidance on here is how you do compilation. Google doesn't own Gradle, for example,
Yep.
right? They don't have a good build system. Apple very recently invested in this SPM, but still, I think a lot of companies are not using SPM, Swift Package Manager. Similarly, a lot of things about observability. Sure, Firebase invested some
Yep.
over there, but Apple has nothing over there.
Yep.
So both these companies have designed tools for small
Yeah, makes
companies,
sense.
startups, but
Yep.
not for big organizations like Uber, Google, Facebook
Yep.
themselves, and DraftKings. Right? So this is where they leave this challenge for individual companies to go solve, and everybody solves in a different way. In
Yeah.
everybody's mind, platform is a different thing. Actually, when I came to DraftKings, it took me a long time to explain to people platform is not just our core use cases. Like core use cases of DraftKings is user management, financial, marketing, deep linking. Platform is much more than that. Platform is all about your core building blocks, how to do observability, how to do crash reporting, how to even compile the code, how do you put your build scripts, how do you make sure you have a great CI/CD pipeline. So
Yeah.
platform is all these things together to make it always productive.
Do you think that it's just a fact of life that not that many companies achieve the kind of scale that you're talking about, and that's just the way it will always be? Or I don't know. I mean, do you think that there are things that the industry at large can do to actually improve this? I mean, one example is, to your build point, I think most large companies end up using basil in some form, and
Yeah.
and it usually ends up with a huge amount of complexity, and it doesn't go well for a variety of reasons. And it's like, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, do you think that these problems just affect relatively few companies, and that's why there hasn't been a solution, or do you think that things will continue to get better?
Uh, I think if you look at the ecosystem, the last 5 years, or if you go back to 10 years, a lot of Fortune 500 companies have an app, and app has been their major source of revenue. So
Yep.
the problem is increasing day by day, and the problem will continue to increase with AI there because now AI can create
Yep.
code very fast.
Sure.
So everybody will have their own apps very soon. If they're not thinking about it, they'll think now. So the problem space is increasing bigger and bigger. And I have a suspicion of myself. I have my own theory that why Google Apple doesn't contribute too much over there, because they have also limited mind capacity to go invest. Should they invest in their OS features? Should they invest in their developer features, or should
Yep.
we invest in their their paid services, right? So if they have to invest $1 billion, they say, look, let me go invest $1 billion in the OS, so it helps everybody,
Yep. Makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
And they are giving chance to these other companies like Griddle, for example, right, or your company, for example. They're giving chance to these companies like, you go and innovate and figure out the best in class. Go work with all these companies and figure out what they really need, because every company's need may be different,
Yep.
right? They're leaving this for you to go do it. If they have to go and talk to all the app developers to do it, they will have to talk to
Yeah.
like so many. They don't have the mind capacity to do it.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about this forever. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Before we end, any final parting thoughts that you'd like to share? Any hot takes about the future? Where do you think things are heading?
Yeah, I would say the next growth phase is about how to use AI agents in mobile development. Now we are hearing a lot of things about AI agent. AI is going to eat the SaaS world, but none of them is coming to mobile development yet. But I think that's where the next phase of growth is. What can AI agents do in the mobile development?
Yeah.
That's
I
the take I want to give to everybody to think
Yeah,
about.
I also wait to see the same thing. Well, anyway, thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation. I think people are going to be very interested to listen. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having
Yeah.
me. My
All right,
pleasure.
everyone. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Beyond the Noise, Signals, Stories, and Spicy Takes. Huge thanks for joining and sharing your story. And you can find this episode and all past ones on the Bitchriff YouTube channel. If you had fun, drop us a review, tell your friends, or yell your favorite hot take into the void. Just make sure to tag us. I'm Matt Klein, and I'll see you next time.